Ladies and gentlemen, today is August 8th, 2022. I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of the Othello School District Board of Directors. We did our flag salute at the beginning of a prior meeting. So I'd like to welcome our guests, those of you that are in the boardroom. If you're online watching us, thank you for taking time out of your busy days to watch us as we conduct our business. I'll entertain a motion for the approval of tonight's agenda.
I will make that motion.
Motion's been made by Director Johnson. Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Director Schutte. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Director Prowse is not present tonight at the meeting. Moving on to item B1. Do we have any public comment? I would like to remind the community that there is an avenue or venue for public comment, and it is welcomed at our meetings. Item B2, board member discussion. Director Stevenson, is there a legislative report?
There is not, but I do want to talk about I'm just going to skip to the next one, is the WASDA Handbook for General Assembly. So WASDA has put out the General Handbook. Instead of taking a ton of time and going through it like I did last year, let's not do that this way. We need to discuss how we all plan on looking at that and making our priorities, and if there's anything that we want to change, and how to vote for that. The deadline for proposed changes, is August 15th through the 18th, so it's too late to do by our next meeting, but there has to be 5 districts that approve to make a proposed change. So I don't really foresee us being the changers of things. There's plenty of districts that do those things, but it's more about where do we want to vote? What do we want to do? Who do we want to have be? Do we all want to be present? Do we want to? We need to be aware of, because this becomes the legislative issues that WASDA goes forward with. And then pick someone later on. Pick who our voting delegates going to be for General Assembly. All of those fun details. Let me look up when General Assembly is. September 30th and October 1st. It's a Friday and Saturday. It could end earlier.
I remember that weekend this year, or last year.
Mm-hmm. And then after those things that are voted upon, we as a board need to pick our top 10 most important. It's not ranked this time. It's just here's the top 10 that we feel like are the most important, not here's our number 1, here's our number 2, so that every district across the state will be doing that, and then they think it will file into the most important things in a slightly different way, but more meaningful.
So I'm hearing you correctly, this is informational. We should all look at the handbook.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have till the 30th of September to choose our voting delegates,
Yes.
those that are representatives. Because I know I got an email with voting credentials already, and I'm like, really? Me again? But
Only because you're the board president and they sent it to every board president.
Yeah, I think we got plenty of time to look at these things, but do we have this, Marissa, this document, the handbook? It's on the website. Okay, if you could forward it to all of us, and Director Stevenson, instruction to us, just read through it, peruse through it, and
So they've categorized it into like teaching and learning sections and safety sections. There's like 5 major sections. There's so that when you're reading it and looking at it, there's permanent positions. These are like foundational to WASDA stuff, like kind of like constitutional kind of things. And then there's legislative priorities, and the legislative things are referred to when our lobbyists for WASDA, or when any WASDA member is going before or speaking to any of our legislators. so that, and it's public, so that everybody can see what the most important things are and stuff. There's some super controversial things in there. There is also, so I'm on resolutions, that is permanent position things. And there are some things that are not foundational to WASDA that have been in the past that are proposed this year. Quite a few. So it's very, very different, both legislative and permanent position things. Things that WASDA have never supported or never been in favor of, but I think will become big debates and topics and discussions. There's been a big shift. I think we've all seen that in board directors across the state. Who's serving and why they're serving and what their purposes are and those kinds of things in the last 3 years. So that's big. So just some informational things for us to know about. Voting is more important, I would say, this year than any other year.
Jen,
Yes,
do we get to vote on this
as a board or just students?
as students? Because I want to say last year Logan had us do something for it, but
He did have you do something,
I can
but
ask him.
no, I don't. I don't think students get to vote. They might.
maybe we just brought you what our thoughts were. Okay, thank you.
Can you go into? Oh, I should have pulled this up. Can you go in a few pages on the handbook? Keep going a little bit more until there's like a. So that's how to do amendments, but probably not going to apply to us. Keep going a little bit more. Then there's dates. So this is how to find the different sections. There's permanent and there's legislative positions. And then there's emergency proposals, which still is under one of those two categories, but how they code different things. They have a new graphic designer, so this book looks very different than it's ever looked in the past. And then there's, keep going a little bit more. There's what looks like, that's what I want to see. Yep. So go to the next page. There's those different sections, and it talks about permanent positions for under the learning category, and then the different pages and what they're called. There's a lot of safe school stuff, and then there's legislative positions, and then so new ones, amended ones, all kinds of different things. So once you really get past like the information pages, there's a lot of proposals. And then every, whether it's the legislative committee or the resolutions committee, all did we propose a do pass and we propose a do not, or we propose a do not pass. And so those committees all did those recommendations as well, which doesn't mean that's what it's going to go. So.
Okay. Well, we'll let us be cautious and careful and read the material, and then we'll have a discussion at the next meeting as to if there's anything that we feel we need to cement, as far as, hopefully by then we'll choose a voting delegate and all that other stuff.
Perfect. So
And be-
please
and be
put
ready.
that on under our board agenda, board member discussions. We don't have any massive discussion, big ticket things on the next board meeting, besides, of course, approving a
The budget.
237-page budget.
All right, thank you for that. Levy workshop, 17th. Pete, do we have a,
Yeah, we've rescheduled that for August 17th from starting at 6 p.m. and just wanted to confirm that we were going to have board members that would be able to participate.
Here,
It's
I
good.
assume, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
great. Okay,
okay,
Okay. We'll communicate with Amy Suarez and Gina Bullis and organize the team to.
hour, 2 hours, do we have time for
I
it?
think we scheduled 2
2 hours?
hours, and we'll
Okay.
include a dinner for everyone so that we can focus on the work.
Very good. All right, and then we have a debrief of our WASDA Board Self-Assessment Workshop we had the other day. I enjoyed it, I really did. I valued that, I think it was very well participated. I think all of us, well, we were forcefully, we were forced to participate with it, but it was good. Several topics. we went into this hoping to, as a unit, as a board, try to figure out some goal setting strategies, procedures, or what we were doing right, what we weren't. And we found out that although not in a direct or concise fashion, we were setting some goals for ourselves, which was encouraging to me. And I enjoyed the workshop. Don't know what you guys think.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed it too. I enjoyed the presenter that we had there that night and how she went through it step by step and went over the surveys with us. We dug into them a little more in detail to help understand the meanings and the numbers from it, and I really enjoyed it.
I like that she forced us to go into specific groups. Some of that was, I already would have talked to this person anyways, and some of them, this is not a person I would have paired with typically, unless assigned. And that was great to be able to see and hear different perspectives and to be able to talk openly about those things. Yeah.
One of those non-labeled team building workshops.
Yes.
I thought she was very, very personable for each of
Sure.
us. I mean, for each of separate people. And I did really like working with her. It was way easier than Zoom too, wasn't it?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, our school board annual calendar continues to be there, and the goals for the superintendent continue to be as we said we would, to keep in front of the community and ourselves. Moving on to item B3, student representative report. Elise, thanks you for being here tonight.
Okay. So school hasn't started yet, so I don't have like a student report, but I got a report from all the principals about what they've been doing in preparation for this school year. So at Ludicaga, they had 5 teacher professional development days focused on school goals. Well, they had their first of 5, sorry. They're implementing their MTSS system, which supports all students so no one falls through the cracks with grade level PLCs. They're building biliteracy through all their content areas by using research-based best practices. They are practicing their social emotional learning with second step lessons and the house system. And they're building a data-driven culture using interim assessments and tracking formative data. At Hiawatha, their leadership team headed to Seattle for a retreat. They had several professional development days, and they're having open house the 23rd from 5 to 6:30 for students and parents to meet their teachers, see what the school is like, and they're going to have hot dogs. At Scootney, they had throughout the summer 3 prep and plan work days to put effective instruction into place for the upcoming school year. They had a workshop on small group instructions to support all student needs, and they're planning a retreat for the 18th to plan orientation days and create a PLC plan that is responsive to team and building needs. At the preschool, and I didn't have a response from Wahidas. At the preschool, they have planned professional development days provided to preschool, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade for early learning, fine motor skills, and developmentally appropriate learning. They're planning for 2 new transitional kindergarten classes. At McFarland, on the 10th, their officers and leadership class is going to do a training and work day. They had professional development teaching days, and they worked on Character Strong, which is their social emotional learning curriculum. They had some work for AVID, their Step Up to Writing, which is their systematic teaching approach for their ELA classes. They did a Teachers Develop group, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, which is a multi-tiered approach to social, emotional, and behavioral support. And then they worked a little bit on EdGems, which is a new math curriculum they're implementing with some teacher training. And then, sorry, I forgot I had to pull one up on my phone. At OHS, maybe. At OHS, they had several professional development days in June. One of them was blueprints and identifying power standards. Another one was continuation of identifying power standards and development of common assessments. There was one on reteaching strategies, standards of based grading philosophy, and then there was another one to plan for advisory, and then they sent several leadership students to a week-long student leadership training near Vancouver in early July. And then their admin has been working to prepare for upcoming staff retreats and meetings before school begins. Any questions? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being proactive and reaching out to these folks. Appreciate that. Okay, moving on to item C1. Before I request a motion, are there any questions on the required approvals?
Yes, there are. I have a couple of accounting questions and then an HR question. So, beginning of the year, buying lots of stuff, I'm sure, like renewing year-long contracts and stuff. Ed Gem's math, she just talked about that a little bit, but we're paying 119. So can you just clarify that?
That is for a math curriculum at McFarland Middle School.
Great. Frontline Ed for 30,000.
That is for subscription for analytics through Frontline for the HR business department.
Okay.
Finance.
And then Northwest textbooks for 95,000.
So that is for, I think for all buildings, and they're for consumables. For example, novels for McFarland's ELA and Ludokaga, some books and science curriculum and stuff like that.
Just lots of
For next year.
books.
Yep.
Right. Okay. And then under personnel assignments for certificated, we have a few teachers that are called replacement teachers. We're hiring replacement teachers. What? I haven't seen that as a title before. I just wanted to, what's that for?
So that would qualify that individual for just, it's understood that it's a one-year contract. We're replacing a position or a person for just the 1 year. And it provides clarity for the association and for their members about that position is going to be open next year.
Okay. So like they're just filling in, someone left quickly, or
they're not qualified or certified, and so the
Okay.
principals decided rather than pursuing a conditional certificate, which requires a stronger commitment to that individual that we're going to partner with them long term. This just gives us a year to test the waters with them, for them to provide the services, and then we move forward and make a plan in the spring. Just gives
Great.
us more flexibility.
perfect. Good to know. Unless there's any other questions, I would like, yes?
I'll entertain a motion to approve required approvals.
You have to entertain my motion before I can motion it. I move we approve required approvals.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. I move that we approve account payables warrants 2. Can I get a
Second.
second? Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And I will have to abstain from this vote.
Motion carries 3-0 with an abstention. Moving on to item C3, superintendent informational item.
Yeah, just a couple of quick items tonight. One is a notification about a community safety forum that the district is going to offer. A little bit different than some of the forums we run in the past in partnership with the board. It really is to provide an update about some of the work that's happened over the summer. I know that in the springtime there was a lot of energy around school safety based on the tragedy that occurred in Uvalde, Texas. And so it's giving the staff an update and the community an update. So we've organized an opportunity here in the boardroom. Our communications director, Ed Peterson, will be broadcasting that and sort of emceeing the event or coordinating the questioning. There'll be participants. Tim Tapp will be there, our safety director, Greg Foltz, myself, and perhaps some building principals, just to talk about where we're at with safety and some updates we've made over the summer. So just making sure we don't drop that ball and pay attention to that conversation.
So that's in person, but are we also having a Zoom or Facebook
Yeah,
Live
it'll
or
be
YouTube also?
Yeah, we'll send out multiple invites, but so there'll be an opportunity to participate face-to-face here in the boardroom, but then we'll also broadcast that so folks can have access to the content, and perhaps we'll set up interactive way for them to ask questions online. I know we've done some of that in the past at some of our school sites during the pandemic, so we certainly can offer that opportunity for folks to participate.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
The next item is around the PLC calendar, and Certainly the practice in the district has been for the board to approve the calendar every year. We try to get those out a couple years ahead. Based on the new OEA contract, there's going to be a change in how we've agreed to establish the contract. It's a perpetual calendar. It will just be the same every year, so there'll be very little. You'll be able to predict for a number of years what the calendar is going to look like. One of the things that the delay in getting a contract with OEA created is a conversation that we've been having with them about our PLC calendar and some confusion that's created in the community when we don't have PLC every Monday. And so there's been some discussion and a conversation with OEA about the potential to have every Monday be a PLC Monday. And so we wanted to check in with the board and make sure that you had a comfort level with that before we got into any formalized agreement about that conversation. So I wanted to test the waters with you on that concept.
It is very confusing which weeks do and don't have PLCs, and to go, oh, we have to rechange our entire family's schedule for Monday mornings because there's not a PLC and I have to take them. Someone has to take them on time. So I love that idea of it always being there, personally.
And that's always the late start, correct?
Right.
Okay.
It would provide the consistency that Director Stevenson described.
Okay.
It would provide some extra opportunities for our staff to get together and work on the things that Elise highlighted in her report. And again, that idea about consistency for our community and it happens to be one of the commitments we're making as a system to really think about our professional learning communities. But again, I know the board has approved that calendar already, so it might mean some adjustment, a slight adjustment to what we're doing, but it seems like it's in the best interest of our staff, and we're hearing that from our principals. And if we're going to hear that from parents as well, I would expect about consistency. We think it's worth the adjustment.
I say go ahead with
Yep.
what you're planning there.
So we'll bring something to the next board meeting to provide that clarification, and then we'll begin communicating that through our multiple channels to get that message out. There's also an additional item that we just found out about here in the last day or so before, after the agenda had been prepared, and it's just sort of a celebration piece. Ed Peterson has been communicating with the city of Othello and our insurance provider. So we're going to sponsor an activity at the Othello Community Pool on Monday and Tuesday, I believe, maybe Wednesday as well, and open it up to our students. They could come have sort of a pool party experience that would be sponsored by the school district. So I wanted you to be aware of that. If you see that in social media, if you see folks that are attending those things, we're gonna try and get as many kids in that pool as we can the last couple days of summer. So I really appreciate Ed's work on organizing that activity.
So, like, can you share times? Are we talking like the after?
It'll be their morning time, so 9 a.m. to 11. It's going to be 100 degrees every day next week again. So
It is?
It's warm enough in the morning. It's very similar to what they did with the summer school celebration.
That might actually get my children out of bed.
There you go.
Thank you. 9 to 11. All right.
Good job with that. Thanks, Ed.
All right.
All right, moving on to item D1. We have a end-of-year report on the graduate profile and benchmark.
Yeah, I'd like to invite the teaching and learning team forward. They're going to share much of the content on tonight's report. I know it's been pushed off a couple of times, and I think as we think about the board calendar annually, this actually feels like the most appropriate time to do it. Next board meeting will be the board meeting right before school starts, and how are we launching into and preparing for the year. But it's important that as we prepare for the year, and the report that Elise gave, it was interesting to hear about the activities and the opportunities that are being provided for staff and that our principals are helping lead. And much of that is based on student performance and student data. And we all know that the last couple of years have been very, very challenging around student performance because we haven't collected some of the data that we've traditionally had. And this year we have some. And so we want to share that with you and talk about where we're at as a system and where we're headed. On the next slide, I just wanted to refresh you just a bit on where we're at with our preparation last school year. And these were the building goals that were established, items that they shared with you. And much like the board and admin retreat today, you had an opportunity to hear from our building leaders about the activities they were going to work on and prepare for in the school year. And one of the things we've really been thinking about the last several years is knowing our impact. These are all exciting things. All of these things work. But did they work in our system? Did they work in our context? Did they work well enough? Did they demonstrate value? And so we want to talk about some of those initiatives and ideas with you today and how our kids did. The next slide provides a summary of those building goals, and really it was around 4 key areas. One is data systems, and so you're going to hear some of the data. We're going to talk about data literacy and what we do with data and knowing how our kids did. You've heard a lot about professional learning communities. We just talked about the calendar, and you heard today our commitment to refining and strengthening our professional learning communities in the Othello School District. Last year, we also spoke about it in terms of the instructional core. That was particularly important post-COVID, thinking about the impacts that the pandemic had on students, teachers teaching in a different format and distance learning, and what that meant for our content and how it was delivered. And Elise talked a lot about roadmaps and benchmarks and those standards and all that kind of work that's happening. That really is all about guaranteed and viable curriculum. So that will always be our work. But that's a summary of what we committed to last year. And you've also heard for at least 3 or 4 years us talk about the data-wise process and driven by data as another way to think about how our kids did. Well, there's a piece in all of those. It's called the ACT phase, where we think about the strategies to address our learning problems and what students and staff are struggling with. And then we implement something. We try it out. We want to see how it worked. And after we do that, we should determine the effectiveness of those actions. Did it matter? And then identify the needed adjustments. We don't toss everything out. We just think about, okay, what are we going to do this next year? And to do that, you have to have some benchmarks and some goals. And so we're going to jump into the benchmarks, a description of those. This will be a reminder for the board, and then we're going to share student performance based on those metrics.
Okay, so these are a list of the benchmarks that we have set in our system. And what we're going to be talking about today is giving you kind of a picture of where we're at with each one of these based off the work this last year. And, you know, 100% is a high bar, but that's where we need to be keeping our focus. And we're not there yet, but we're going to continue working toward each of those. So throughout our system, you're going to see that we have some data around what our kinder students are experiencing, getting ready for first grade, how our third graders are doing with reading, because if they're able to read by third grade, that's an indicator of their success moving forward in school. You're going to see some data about our English language learners, and that's a real need that you're going to be, I know you heard about today in our admin retreat, and that's going to be a focus throughout the year. Passing algebra by the end of 9th grade is an indicator of success in high school and beyond. Our high school principal will be here talking about our the percent of our 9th graders that are on track for graduation, and then we'll also talk about our graduate profile, which is in development, but that's going to be an exciting piece of what is going to be our promise to our community about what our students are able to do and be by the time they leave our system. Okay, so the graduate profile. Was this, Amy, your part, or were you gonna?
I'm gonna wrap it up at the end with some data.
Okay. So the profile is, like I said, a promise that we want to make to the community. And this was work that a group of administrators started, I would say, a year and a half ago, really trying to look at what is it that we want our a graduate from Othello to embody. And so you'll see here, critical thinker, communicator, learner, collaborator, and advocate. And we are really in thinking about these attributes deeply, and we know we need more feedback from all of our stakeholders, students, community, parents, staff. And so you're going to be hearing a lot more about that in the near future this year. My goal is by the end of this year that this is something that everybody is well aware of and feels like they've had a voice in helping develop exactly how this works.
Before we move on to the data, I do want to touch on that idea about hearing from our stakeholders. And it ties into the conversation you had just a few moments ago about the debrief regarding the WASDA training for the board around the self-assessment. I know one of the takeaways I brought from that meeting was this conversation about strategic planning. Where's the board headed? Where's the system headed? What are we asking our employees to do every day? What are we promising to our community? So that those sessions around gathering feedback about these aspirations for our system that ties directly to the board's work. So there will be an opportunity this year, and I think we heard it from WASDA, where we might spend 2 or 3 months just really listening and planning and thinking through that process. And perhaps the second year we launch into a strategic planning process. And maybe that's something that we launch at this time next year. But it's time that we get moving, particularly on this profile and the benchmarks. It's been 3 years of just sort of spinning our wheels. And it's going to be important that your work connects with our work. And so that idea about involving stakeholders in your participation is going to be really important about determining where we're headed.
All right, so one of our first benchmarks is that 100% of kindergarten students will be ready for first grade. And this goal used to be more centered on our preschoolers being ready for kinder, but that changed this last year because we don't service every single preschool student in our community. We service a large number of them, but not all of them. But we do service all of our kindergarten students. So one piece of assessment data that we look at is the WA Kids assessment, which we've been doing in our district for probably almost 15 years now. But over the years, we've tried to align that more to the instruction that's happening in the classroom and make sure that we're meeting the state compliance. So with the WA Kids assessment, you can see these 6 areas up here where students are assessed while they're in kindergarten, and the state only requires us to do it in the fall. It has to be done usually by the end of October. But this year, as a district, we did it 3 times so that we could track that progress over time. So this is the results from the spring. And a couple of pieces on there that I think are important is the literacy. You can see that overall we had 96% meet or exceed the benchmark for literacy. And I think that's important because that ties into our students being able to be successful in reading by 3rd grade. Another big piece was the social emotional. So again, you can see at 87%. So social emotional is being able to self-regulate, being able to solve problems, being able to communicate with others. So under each one of those sections, there's other benchmarks that they're striving to meet. But I think social emotional has been a real focus as Paula and myself have worked with the kindergarten teams this year. And then another piece is the mathematics. So again, tying into by 9th grade, if we want them to be successful in algebra and be on track for graduation, mathematics is going to play a big piece in that. So all of those areas, I think the kindergarten teachers were very successful. But those were some really key areas that I think are important in their future in education. Another benchmark or piece of data that we collect in kindergarten, partly to meet with some state compliance, and then also kind of just to track that literacy piece, is on the DIBELS. And so this year, all the schools, one assessment that they gave in common was the nonsense, or knowing their letter names and their letter sounds. And so they're just kind of just a breakdown. Again, they gave that the 3 times throughout the year. And so by the end of the year, that's how many students they had that were meeting that benchmark. So overall, we had about 53% of our students that were successful with their letter names and letter sounds.
All right, the second benchmark to talk about is 100% of our 3rd graders on grade level in their language of instruction. And this was, the first set of data here is from the STAR reading assessment. So the STAR assessment is an online assessment. It's given, many school districts across the country use it. And so as we went through and we looked at, this is the spring or the final of the year to see where they were at. And so you can see the various percentages at each school, and then as a district overall at 46% were on grade level. When we look at the Smarter Balanced assessment, Smarter Balanced is always an interesting assessment. For this one, after a couple of years of not having, because of COVID and everything else that went with that and the limitations, this was the first time in a couple of years that we were able to have a spring assessment with Smarter Balanced. And so you can see that as a district, we averaged 23% that met standard. Clearly, this is nowhere near where we want to be. And we certainly recognize that, and I know that to a teacher and to a building, right, they're not satisfied with that either. And so there's a lot of work and effort that's going in to be able to say, well, what was it? What were some of the causes that contributed to that, and what are some things that we can be doing different? And so today, kind of unique that we're presenting right now after you got to hear the building plans, but you could hear the work and the collaborative effort that is going to be taking place and really data focused and centered and making decisions so that we can make some improvements in there and increase the number of students that are at grade level in third grade.
So this next slide just talks about when you look at Washington State students, about 12% of the students in third grade across the state qualify as EL students. For Othello, 64% of our third graders are EL learners. So when we talk about ELL, it really intertwines itself with everything that we do. That's the population that we serve. And if you look across the state for ELL students, only 15% of them across the state met standard for reading in third grade. And Othello matches that, roughly matches, where I think we were at 14%. But our population is so high that it really has an impact on our students and what we do. Now this next slide is about our district benchmark around all students exiting in 5 years. Okay, so federally, to meet guidelines, they say the standard is between 5 and 7 years. Washington State has chosen to pick the 5-year mark. So that's what we measure on. You can see in 2022, well, when you start on the left, 2016 through 2020, those are the exit results for students exiting in 5 years. And I want to point out that that was a different test. That was on the ELPA assessment. We haven't assessed in 2 years, and then we get to 2022, and you can see our new data point there. So this last year, our students that met standard and exited within 5 years is 31.8%. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First, I already alluded to, we have a new assessment. It's a different model for the students. I will say that it is a much more robust test, and it gives us a lot better data and information around where the students are really at. It actually requires a change in how that we assess. So we take 2 of the sections first, then we have to skill group students and give them an assessment based on how they performed on these first 2. So it is a much better system for us, but it did have an impact. And I think the other thing that has to be called out when we look at language acquisition, we took a 2-year break almost from school. When you're learning another language, you have to practice that language. I don't care if you're in the high school taking a Spanish class or a French class. If you leave that class and never use it, you forget it. It's the same thing with our students when they're at these younger grades. They have to practice. A lot of them spoke very little English for 2 years, so it did set them back. I know that at the high school level, our Spanish teachers and our French teacher noticed the impact that it had on student learning on those 2 years. It's difficult to do foreign language in a distance learning model. So, not making excuses, but this is the current reality of where we're at, and to address this, we are starting a district level steering committee for our ELL teachers. It's time to refocus. We've gotten out of the pandemic. Let's refocus our practices. Let's put emphasis and money behind where it needs to be with performing for our ELL students, and then we're working with the ESD, Dr. Calgill, and we're just gonna, like I said, refocus that and get things moving in the right direction again.
Our next benchmark here is that we want all of our students to pass Algebra 1 by the end of 9th grade. And this is a key indicator for our students, because if students don't do that, then similar to the lower grade levels, they're not on track, right? Passing Algebra 1 by the end of 9th grade means that they're on track and they're on pace. And if they don't do that, then it really limits other courses that they can take in high school, especially in mathematics, and that really limits opportunities for them later. And we don't want to put those limits on our students or to have them limited in that way. And so it's a key indicator of student success in high school and beyond. And you can see that we also have some other data up there about our elementary schools. And it may seem a little bit out of place, but again, our students need to stay on track. They need to continue learning. And so even though this looks like it lives at the high school level, because it says 9th grade Algebra 1, all of the schools in our system have a part in making sure that this is achieved. It's not just one school. By the time they get to the high school, there's 1 year to make sure this happens. And we have 9 previous years of schooling that help them get to this point to where they can be successful. And so that's why that we've included that data up there about our elementary schools. And also at MMS, they can earn those algebra credits too. If students are progressing along appropriately, they can take that and they can earn it there. And so all the schools in our system really do have a part in making sure that this is a benchmark that's achieved, so our students aren't limited based upon what they have access to.
So what we're looking at here is our 9th grade on track to graduate over the past few years. On average, we sit at just a little bit below 65%. And as Paul just said, the indicator for this to track for graduation is if a 9th grader has failed one or more classes. We also know that student behavior, and student attendance also has a huge impact upon graduation rates, especially during that freshman year. Some of the things that we are working on at the high school to try to help this and try to increase that score is that we have a freshman academy, which on August 25th, we have freshmen only, trying to get them kind of used to the high school, at least for a day. They get to meet their teachers, they get to do some bonding, they get to do some tour of the high school. Another thing we have is an everyday advisory, and that's for all of our students, trying to build those relationships with our students, especially starting with our freshmen. Our counselors are going to start doing grade checks earlier rather than just junior and senior years, but start with their freshman year. So that way, if there is an issue with credits, we know right away. We'll also notify those families sooner than later. We also have Gear Up, which provides some tutoring, and they also help us out with contacting parents if we do have some students that are struggling. We have a program we're going to be starting this year, RTI, which is Response to Intervention, which helps to identify students that are struggling so that way we can focus on them and try to get them going in the right direction. This second slide right here, what this does is it shows our students, if we start with the class of 2019, we can see how many students, or freshmen I should say, that were on track to graduate, which was 61.2. And you can see after 4 years that cohort graduated 81.1%. And you can see the rest of them. It's a really good increase as far as going from 9th grade on track to graduation. Ultimately, again, our goal is to make sure that 100% of our 9th graders are on track to graduate. Therefore, our graduation rate will also increase.
Before we jump into the next couple of slides, could you go back one slide, John? And I'd like to call the board's attention to the sort of static nature of that line. It doesn't go up or down very much. And go to the next one. Very similar there. Moving data at a school 5 or 10 points is very, very difficult. It's challenging work. And our schools are perfectly designed for the outcomes that we're getting. So making the right moves so that we change and redesign them just enough so that we get those numbers trending in the right direction, that's really our work. And that's what you should hold me accountable to. We're talking about how kids did, which is directly connected to, for many teachers, a very personal way to think about their work. But it doesn't stop at the teacher level. It's at the principal level and it's at my level. I take ownership of all the data that you're seeing tonight. I want to be able to converse about it and think about it and talk about it and help people process it. So you need to hold us accountable, but you also need to understand how difficult this work is. And pandemic or no pandemic, dramatic changes in configuration, no changes, the data is hard to move. And when people do move it, we should celebrate that. We should celebrate and acknowledge that because there are pockets of excellence in our school district. Some of our kids are doing really, really well, and some of our teachers are doing really, really well. And it'll be our job to recognize and spread that good work that is happening across the system. So as Amy transitions into the graduate profile, that's another way to think about our work and celebrate the skills and dispositions that our kids demonstrate when they graduate from Othello High School or Desert Oasis.
So you just heard a lot of concrete black and white data, and of course I get the one that's vague and subjective to try to explain. But probably this is my favorite one, demonstrate meaningful progress. So 5 principals, 5 teachers, 5 parents might have different definitions of what that might mean. So as Jessica mentioned, that's going to be the bulk of our work this year, is everybody in buildings, teachers, grade teams, down to just pockets in our schools, determining how we are going to measure meaningful progress. But if you asked me right now, with current data, some examples of how we might measure these things, these dispositions that are very hard to measure: critical thinker, communicator, learner, collaborator, advocate. Those are things that we do have data for, that I would explain to you and say, here's a way to measure those things. And for sake of time, I'm not going to go into all 5, but I think a couple of the more interesting ones would be a communicator, for example. Again, you might have a different definition than I do of what a good communicator might be. But using our brand new K-3 second step curriculum, that was our most newly adopted SEL piece that met our sexual health education compliance piece, as well as now we know in K-3 all of our teachers have been trained in this curriculum. All of our kids are going to get the same thing. And so we know that in kindergarten they're going to get a communication lesson that has to do with apologizing and how apologizing to somebody else can help. In first grade, there's going to be lessons around ways to show and tell our kindness. And so first graders are going to learn about kindness and how do we show that and how do we tell that. Excuse me. In second grade, they're going to get lessons about giving advice to somebody who's having a hard time and how to communicate with those people and get your point across. And in third grade, they're going to learn about how someone feels and identify an act of kindness that might make them feel better. And so those are very subjective, non-tangible types of things, but there's measurable curriculum and lessons, and I will be able to tell you all of those kids are going to get them, and we're going to measure that through reflection and presentations and maybe art projects, and we're going to get really creative. And that's just our little K-3 guys, and so certainly you can imagine what we'll be able to do through the 12th grade. The learner piece is probably the easiest part of the grad profile to measure, because we can take any of the things that you just heard about and really pick them apart. Graduation rate is going to be one that we always all watch for. But to really break that down, and there are some celebrations in our brand new data that came out for the class of 2021. We kind of glossed over that 82.5% was the grad rate for the state, and we were at 86.5 for the class of 21. For the first time since our trend data has been monitored, our males outperformed our females. So typically we've known that girls blossom sooner and usually graduate at a higher rate than their male counterparts. But in Othello, for the first time, the boys outperformed the girls. So whatever that means, but we could look at that closer, figure out why, make a goal around bringing that more equal, whatever we want to do. And then finally, I thought this was something to celebrate. For years since I've been in the school district, we've talked about closing the gap between our white students and our Hispanic, Latino, of any race students. And as recent as 2014, we had a 20% discrepancy in the graduation rate of those two populations. And in 21, we were down to 5.8%. So that gap really closed. So through this profile work, I think we'll be able to really look at, why does that happen? Is it something we're doing accidentally? Is it something we're doing intentionally? And let's replicate it. And all of our rates, by the way, and all those populations I mentioned were higher than the state average. So that doesn't mean, all right, everybody can just relax and say we're good. But it is something to celebrate. Both Othello High School and Desert Oasis had really high graduation rates in our new data. And finally, I just want to address the advocate piece, because my heart is in the counseling and the mental health and well-being of our kids. And so when they say, Amy, how in the world are we going to measure whether a kid can advocate for themselves or not? I'll show you the Healthy Youth Survey data that we're starting to look a lot closer at. And that's a survey that the state has us take in 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade, and typically on even years. The pandemic got us off a little bit, so we have data actually from 21. And I can tell you that people smarter than me have figured out the metrics to measure, to develop questions that measure that they're feeling sad and hopeless, and on the other end of the spectrum that they're feeling happy and positive and they can take on the world. But I look at our things like from 2018 to 2021, we had a 10% jump in our 8th graders that felt sad and hopeless. We had a 6% jump in our 10th graders and an 8% jump in our 12th graders. And that's too much. That's too much. And then on the other hand, they were asked, do you have an adult that you can go to when you feel this way? And we had a small decline in that number. In every grade, 2 to 4% felt less students felt like they had someone to go to. And the good news is our top percent, like in the senior year, 78% of the kids said they did have someone to go to. But that's still too many students that don't. So for me, I hope that we really look at this kind of thing, and this graduation profile is going to help us focus on that stuff as well as these other important factors. But it's forcing us to find ways to address those problems and intentionally make sure that our kids have, the things they need to take care of themselves, become whole children. Finally, to address some of those issues in advisory, I feel really good about the intentionality. I can tell you that on September 26th last year, all of our 9th graders had a lesson about skill building for mental health and well-being, where they learned definitions about depression and anxiety and different things and what to do about them, signs to look for if you're feeling that way, or people around you. And finally, in a full week in October, our 9th graders all have a full unit on rethinking stress and tools and coping skills. And for sure, 5 years ago, we didn't do that. And 10 years ago, nobody even thought about it. We had to define what's social emotional learning, or that there's no place in school for that. Well, now there is, and we know how important it is. And so my hope is that the grad profile will really surface some of those kind of things in the future.
So when you think about those benchmarks as a whole, we clearly have a lot of work ahead of us. And like Pete said, moving that data is a very difficult thing. But we have a plan, and you got to hear some pieces of that plan today during the admin retreat. As a system, we're not going to come on orientation day on the 23rd and tell everybody about a lot of new things to address our goals. What we're going to do is double down on what we know research says works, and on things that we already have in place, and we just need to get better at them. So the first is professional learning communities, or PLCs. The way we collaborate together matters for how we learn together as adults and how our students learn from us as well. And so having that collective efficacy around that work and knowing really clearly about what we're teaching and why we're teaching it and how students know that they're successful is incredibly important. The second, as you heard, we've got a real need around our English language learners. And so we're going to be working with regional partners to really look at what's going to work best for those students and focus in on that. And then lastly, feedback. Feedback includes the words that we use with each other. It also includes data and numbers. So you got a lot of feedback today around where we're at with the system. And so we're going to be working as leaders around understanding data better and how to use it and how to talk about it with teachers and with students and with parents. And we're going to be giving each other feedback about how we feel too, because all of this needs to be happening within a context of belonging to this system and being responsible to it in a number of different ways. And so I'm excited about the work that's ahead of us. It's going to be hard work, but it's work worth doing.
All right, appreciate that from the group. John, before we go to that slide, I added a slide, so you guys are all going to let you love when I do that kind of stuff. But I'm gonna jump on this slide. I just needed her to refresh it. But this idea about systems thinking that Jessica just touched on, yeah, we're on 17. There we go. This is where we're going to end on. But this idea, the upper right-hand quadrant, do you see the feedback from student learning to the organization? That really is about how the students did on our making progress towards our benchmarks. They're telling us what they learned. They demonstrated it through those assessments. And so we have to learn from that. We have to think about that. We need to get feedback from our principals, which you heard today. We need support around these ideas. This is where my teachers are. And how do the principals know that? They heard it from their teachers. Their teachers told them, enough of this, more of that. Here's what the research says works. That really is what we're living in, is this systems thinking idea. But as they were sharing their pieces, this next slide came back to me. And so I'll try and go down the road. But Amy talked about closing the gaps between our boys and girls. We kind of got lucky there. Do we know why that happened, and can we replicate it? We don't want to be there. We want to be in leading and learning. We'll take the luck, we'll take the results, but we need to understand it deeply. When Jennifer talks about the number of first graders who have met standard on the literacy scores, why isn't that translating to third grade? What do we need to learn about what happens between first and third grade when they take that assessment in the spring? We've got to figure that out. We've got to make sure that that number matches what happens in first grade. When John talks about third grade math, or he and Paul are talking about those concepts and how that builds up to ninth grade algebra, do we have pockets where teachers are demonstrating tremendous competency in making progress with kids who typically have struggled? And if so, are we learning from them? Are we sharing that learning with other teachers? Are we able to share the data in a transparent way so people feel comfortable having those difficult conversations? Are those things happening? What are we thinking about with our high school graduates when Scott talks about attendance and discipline? What did we learn last year by the changes we made to the discipline structure? What are we going to do about it this year? Who are we going to partner with to make sure that it's more effective and more efficient for teachers and more impactful for students so they get the supports they need? When David talks about our ELL numbers, and we're talking about, Amy spent an hour talking to you about FTE. 65% of those FTE are ELL learners. That has to be a priority for us. We have to think about how we reach those students through effective instruction. And so this idea about learning and leading, we want to live on the right-hand side of this quadrant. We want to be really intentional and understand deeply. That's knowing your impact. When I started with that, and we talked about the work that John Hattie talks to us about, that idea on the right is about why that occurred. And you're more likely to replicate it, and you're more likely to be more efficient at it, and you're more likely to be able to train other teachers so they can have a similar impact. Exciting work happening in the system. Remember, it's been about a year and a half ago now, we talked about weighing the pig. And we had that cute little pig that Lindsay thought was the best image ever. This was a chance to weigh it. We haven't had a chance to do that for a couple of years. But we also talked about that day was the importance of what we're feeding it every day. And how are we feeding and supporting our teachers? How are we feeding and supporting all the staff that come to work every day to help every student learn? Because folks get into this work and they show up and speak like this tonight because they really want to make a difference for kids. And we have to live on that right-hand side. We have to understand that our work matters because it matters for so many families, particularly in a community like this, that we get it right. So I want you to hear from me very, very directly that we're going to get it right. We're going to get it right, and we're going to make sure that the data and student performance and student outcomes and student life chances are improved because we lived on the right-hand side there. So appreciate the opportunity to give you an update tonight on where we're at and what we're working on. It's exciting work, and I can't wait till they all show up here in just a couple weeks.
Any questions from the board? I did write a few things down, and first of all, thank you all. I was going to direct these at Pete, but at the end of the day, it's for all of you. Thank you for the update. I mean, for following through, Pete. You told us that, like you said in the beginning, we've been mulling this, and for whatever reason, the next meeting, and you set a date, and it speaks to your accountability piece, and when you say something, you commit to it. Thank you for the update. I can't wait to like you just said, physically see this materialize. To know that there's systems in place that we can resort to today to see why it happened, and that's just going to be further improved upon. And I need to say this, and I'll say this publicly, and this goes as an attaboy is insufficient. Thank you for your candor, Pete, in embracing this. You basically challenged us tonight. You said you accept this data, and you want us to hold you accountable to that. That tells me your mind's in the right place. That tells me that your perspective, not just this year, the future of OSD is something that you have really taken the time to study. You've embraced it, and you're here to make a difference, and I appreciate that very much. I know as one board member, it means a lot to me to hear that the guy at the top is feeling this way, and to me, it's just gonna correlate into him telling anybody that he has under him that we got to make sure. You guys heard me what I said, and for you all, I mean, it might mean maybe a tough conversation here and there, but that's okay because the more I'm around you guys, I can sense that you guys are okay with that, because at the end of the day, as the 4 of us or 5 of us that are leading this, we're in this for our kids. Our thoughts, our intentions, our reason for doing what we do is in the right place. And I just need to commend you guys that this is great information. Again, we acknowledge our deficiencies, but at the same time, in the same sentence, you guys have told us there's a plan in place to improve these things and hopefully one day get those 100% to where they need to be. And I just commend you all for the work and thank you very much on behalf of the board. Okay, moving on to item E1. We have a DOP 3432. It's the first reading. Don't know if anybody has any questions. Is the verbiage change, Pete, to exercise, is that because of an RCW, or is that just something that we're...
Yeah, we invited Tim Taff in.
Okay.
Tim did the work around this topic here, so he's our expert.
Yeah, it's just a preference.
Okay.
It's just a preference. The idea, some of the mentality behind that is a drill sometimes can be, I'm checking this off because that's what we're supposed to do. Exercise meaning it's an intentional, purposeful movement so that when this happens, we know what to do.
I appreciate that.
And I think we all know words are so important. Yes. And changing to shelter in place learn or whatever.
Shelter and teach.
Shelter and teach. Yes, love that.
So the idea behind some of the motivation behind it, let's start there, is be purposeful and intentional with the words we use. So we don't use a lot of words with a lot of confusion. This is the word we're using for this situation, and that's all that happens. There's some new legislation around the drills and how many we have of each. That number's kind of become fluid, which is, I like. The HB 1940 talks about the superintendent can, you need to do these functional exercises, but you can do the ones that make sense in your area. We don't have a whole lot of tsunamis here. So tsunami practice really doesn't make sense. But
Right.
we do have wildfires, we could have evacuation, we could have a radiation, release, and so we need to practice things that make sense to protect our kids for something like that. So that's kind of the idea about it. The policy needs to change first, so then we'll move to some of the employee handbook. We'll move to the school, each one of the schools' safety book, and then eventually to the safety prevention and crisis plan, so that wording will all make sense on the movement of it. So that's where we're headed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tim. Appreciate it. Moving on to item F1, upcoming events. There's a calendar there. The only thing is our levy workshop, and that's been decided tonight that it'll be the 17th, approximately 6 to 8. I believe Marissa's already said that she's going to send out potential quorum for the new teacher orientations and
For all of these that aren't regular meetings already?
for the new teacher orientation, the all staff is what I was referring to. Potential quorum will be put out.
Okay.
Is there something we're missing on there? Can you guys?
Do you want us at new teacher orientation and all staff if we're able? Are you planning on us?
Yeah, we were hoping that you would be at each of those events. The all-staff orientation time there, though, is going to be, it's going to be more like a 10 to 2 kind of activity. If the board wanted to see all chunks and have a shared lunch with staff. So that one would be a little bit different than what's listed here. But yeah, we would, the 7:30 to maybe 9-ish kind of activity at the new teacher orientation would be helpful if you want to meet new staff and have a chance for them to be introduced to you.
I think I'm not able to come to new teacher. And really, I had a doctor's appointment for my kid that I can't, it was difficult to get into anyways. But I'm planning on all staff. But you only want us 10 to 2 for all staff?
It will only run from 10 to 2. But
Okay.
we'll make sure that we announce a potential quorum for all of those events and just hope that everyone can make it as available.
Marissa, if you could send us updated times for those, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you. All right, board self-assessment meeting. Well-planned agenda. I'm going to continue to say that. Relevant, concise, precise information that is relevant and pertinent to the day-to-days, to the time of the year and everything else that's going on at the district.
Loved being able to see and to have the, what was this presentation called? Graduate profile and benchmark end of year report. I know that this is like an end of year and fresh beginning of year set of goals, idea, concept that is really, I know that we've talked about it and had these all kinds of different times throughout the year, but this is really relevant now.
That's what I could say. I really appreciated the profile and benchmark report because it was almost like a state of the state of our school district. And I loved your goals 100% because that means each and every student.
I loved in the meeting minutes that it also listed, besides board members, it listed student reps that were present. That was really meaningful and pertinent, I felt like, to include their names as well.
An excellent budget report. Thank you, Amy, and your staff. Really understanding is really what I think is, it's our words that we can understand instead of legal words. And it was really nice reading. And now we can go back and we have the information. Have questions later, yeah. Thank you so much.
I commend the participation from all of us tonight. I think everyone spoke up when needed, and it needs to be that way. I know our quiet one is now on board, and she's not afraid to share her ideas. I'm not talking about Sharon, but I am. So no, I appreciate that. I think, and it goes to what started approximately 18 months ago, however long it was, that we were told that we were dysfunctional, maybe not in those words, that it needed to start with us and collaboration between the new guy and the board. And I think it's coming around. I am glad. I know earlier today we heard it was going to be a real long meeting, but at the end of the day, when it's well structured, when the participants know their role, and we stay on track, you know, we're not going to be very late tonight. And I think balanced participation from us goes to that, and everybody involved. So I got to mention that tonight.
I think we're climbing that wall. We're making our way to the top, all of the whole district. And I think we've had everybody on the back. Parents, students,
Absolutely.
teachers, staff, district, everyone, because we all have a main goal, and I think we're seeing it.
Well, and I think a lot of what Sharon is saying isn't just specifically, I mean, yes, from this meeting and this presentation, but also the meeting right before that, and then the meeting before that. All of us, a day of long meetings, longer for some than others. It brought like this cohesion amongst all of us for us to be able to see and understand that it makes this presentation that much more relevant to know that there's the funding sources for it, that there's plans at each campus for all of these things. And we don't get to see like all of those kinds of details all that very often.
Anything you'd like to add, Pete?
Say again?
Anything you'd like to add, or?
I'd like it to be recognized, the great job I did in capturing those today. Not very many misspellings, so. Also, I want to take the opportunity to thank the folks that were presenting tonight from the teaching and learning team. And I guess thinking about my own commitment and persistence and why I'm so passionate about this work, and what gives me the confidence to speak in that way is those people. Because I know we have such talented people, such smart people, such skilled people on that team and leading our buildings and in our teaching staff. The talent lives in this community. It exists here. And we can do some really cool work, and we're going to do it. I have been very consistent with them, and I think with you, I'm not interested in doing average or mediocre stuff. Our kids don't deserve that. And I'm just not interested in doing it. So as long as I'm here, I'm going to push as hard as I can to make sure that I stay clear with that and that we put the right things in place to make sure that our kids get what they deserve. So I really wanted to acknowledge those folks for coming out tonight and for helping communicate the state of the state. We're in a good spot. We've been in rougher spots over the last couple of years, and are we happy with where we're at? No. But we've learned a lot, and we know where we're headed. And now it's time for the kids to come back and for us to get to work. So appreciate the board's engagement tonight with all those concepts and what was a very long day for you all. So appreciate your efforts as volunteers to hang in there today. So thanks.
Awesome. With that, our business is concluded and this meeting is adjourned.